if one were to consider a fundamental thinker of Indian nationalism, Indian polity, Indian culture and spirituality and tradition, Ram Swarup ji, not a trained philosopher, because unfortunately the Marxist domination of the academia in this country insisted that you had to be a trained historian to speak on history, insisted that you had to be a trained philosopher to speak on philosophy. And under the Marxist rubric, Sri Aurobindo is not a philosopher, or Pandit Deendayal Upadhyaya is not a philosopher, because they were not trained philosophers. So, and they were not trained historians. I mean, people like Jadunath Sarkar or G.S. Sardesai, for that matter, fell out of the way because they did not conform to the Marxist framework, or they were not, G.S. Sardesai, for example, was not a trained philosopher, trained historian. Ram Swarup, Sri Aurobindo's Uttarpada speech, 30th May 1909, Ananda Kumaraswamy's essays on national idealism, and in that the chapter, The Deeper Meaning of the Struggle, and K.C. Bhattacharya's Swaraj in Idea. If you were to ask me on how to understand or begin trying to evaluate spiritual nationalism, these are some of the fundamental texts that I believe one should go through. These pioneers also waged a long struggle but knew no rancor. They fought a national battle without ceasing to be great humanists. I think this defined what was termed spiritual nationalism. I mean, you can call it in any other term that you wish to. Spiritual nationalism is just a nomenclature. Constantly in every writing, in every articulation, be that starting from Swami Vivekananda, Ananda Kumaraswamy, Sri Aurobindo, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal, Lokmanya Tilak. One of the leitmotif was this, that we have, and Sri Aurobindo in his writings in the Bande Mataram, because it's his 150th year also that we have just crossed. In his Bande Mataram clearly says, Ananda Kumaraswamy also says in his writings, that our opposition to colonial rule is not based on racial hatred. It's not based on India for Indians only. But it is based on this fundamental belief that we feel that India has a very peculiar and particular contribution to make to the world. She cannot make that contribution under a state of bondage where she is not free to carry out her own, to lead her own institutions. She is not free to initiate her own thinking. She is not free to take command of her destiny. And therefore, we feel that we need to be politically free in order to be able to radiate a certain cultural and a certain spiritual message. Swami Vivekananda's fundamental texts, his lectures from Colombo to Almora, was one of the fundamental text reading material for all revolutionaries. And you might know that the Ramakrishna mission was under surveillance by the British intelligence. Swamiji himself was for a very long time. In fact, 1890s, if you go through British intelligence reports, they clearly say that there's a very bright and a very dominant looking sannyasi, young sannyasi, who is going around the northern India in support of the cow protection movement. And his name is some, they couldn't perhaps write Vivekananda, sometime it was Vivek Ananda, sometime it was Vivekakananda, like that, But you get that record. Swami Abhedananda, for example, he followed Swami Vivekananda to the west, and his Brookline lectures, which came out as a book, India and Her People, it was promptly banned by the British. And he goes into a there were a series of lectures that he delivered, I think about 16 lectures. And then they were compiled in a book. And he goes into the depth of the essence and uniqueness of India. In a sense, he sat in the United States and spoke about Indian exceptionalism. The Americans are very proud about American exceptionalism, but I think one of the most fundamental articulators of Indian exceptionalism, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Abhedananda also. And the text was banned. It is available on archive.org. It's there on our bjp.org website as well. Sri Aurobindo says, let us first be national, then let us be aware of nationalism, then let us concentrate on internationalism. Mahatma Gandhiji says, there is no contradiction between nationalism and internationalism in my political schema. But I need to be nationally possessed, self-possessed, to be able to radiate my international message. Otherwise, speaking about internationalism when you are under subjection makes no sense. 30th May 1909, one can say, perhaps this was the first time that a political leader of national stature, Swamiji never came into politics directly. Sister Nivedita had to disassociate herself from Ramakrishna Mission to undertake political activity. But a political leader of national stature in 1909, Sri Aurobindo was the only one who was at large. Tilak was in Mandalay. All the others who were part of the Swadeshi movement had been deported. All of Sri Aurobindo's colleagues had been deported. Bipin Chandra Pal, Lajpat Rai had gone abroad. Sri Aurobindo was the only leader who was at large. And after release from jail, he was invited by Society for the Promotion of Religion in Uttarpada. And that is where he gave his speech, the famous Uttarpada speech that we all quote, that we all cite, which continues to be extremely relevant. And there he openly speaks about his experience in Alipur jail, and he brings about this terminology where he says Sanatan Dharma, that is nationalism. When it is therefore said that India shall rise, it is the Sanatana Dharma that shall rise. When it is said that India shall be great, it is the Sanatana Dharma that shall be great. When it is said that India shall expand and extend herself, it is the Sanatana Dharma that shall expand and extend itself. And that famous, his famous lines, at the end he says, Sanatana Dharma, that is nationalism. When we speak about spiritual nationalism, when we speak about cultural nationalism, K.C. Bhattacharya argues that we should first be conscious. We should be conscious that there is subjection, that we are culturally subject. We are culturally a subject nation. I feel the agenda of cultural subjection is not yet over. It's an ongoing agenda. And so therefore you have to have a number of books being written, the narrative being pushed. Many ask the government should change this, should bring in that. But the point is, like on Lachit Barphukan's commemoration day, Union Home Minister made a very interesting point. He said, identify 300 battles. In that, identify 30 figures. Who stops you from writing books and pushing? Spiritual nationalism, in that entire rubric, you had this entire national education movement which was started. You had K.M. Munshi who established the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan with the objective of promoting, of patronizing, of supporting any attempt at translation of India's seminal texts, reinterpreting them, reprinting them. The national education movement in Bengal and across the country generated a very vibrant group of young scholars. And some of them became the leading thinkers of cultural nationalism. I'm sure all of us sometime or the other have read The Fundamental Unity of India by Radha Kumud Mukherjee. 2014 was 100 years of that writing. And the fundamental unity of India actually encompasses what is meant by cultural nationalism. And so there was no compartmentalization. You never had, you could see, you could find, you could read a Lala Lajpat Rai also speaking about the cultural fundamentals of our freedom movement as well as hard politics and negotiation. There was no compartmentalization. You had a Sri Aurobindo who continued with the political movement and yet spoke about the necessity of trying to understand what Sanatan Dharma means and how it can drive our nationalism.